We will now return to our supervision in Hughes Hall.
Are there any best practices or success stories where trade has been directly contributed to narrowing the inequality gap?
Well, actually think of case studies, oddly enough, like Rwanda, post-genocide, post-conflict Rwanda, where trade was heavily skewed towards local industries, the medium, small, micro enterprises. And Rwanda purposely said that they were going to avail of SDTs for purposes of allowing enough time for their local producers. They're now the major transport hub. Who would have thought Kigali would become Africa's major transport hub? It's landlocked. It doesn't have a natural port. But now about 80% of the traffic in goods now go through the port in Kigali, which wouldn't have happened if Rwanda was forced to read its obligations under trade under very strict terms. Instead, they relied on SDT. They relied on the flexibilities in the trading system to allow them to cushion their domestic service producers that enable the creation of the port, that enable the provision of warehousing and all of these services. And 2024, Kigali is the one of the biggest hubs of transport and trading goods from all over the world. That to me is at least one of those success stories where if states really are very careful about understanding the flexibilities, there's space for them to support local producers, to support industries that would otherwise be terribly disadvantaged by market forces.
Actually, your example already partly answered some of my questions, because I was thinking that's a very innovative way for that country to actually use trade agreement.
Mm-hmm.
So using that particular example, could you please elaborate more on the importance of innovation in a sense that it could be a mechanism to make sure that we can use trade agreement to promote sustainable development, but in the same way that these innovations address complexities in trade agreements, but still the sustainability pillars of economy, environment, and social are ensured. Because in the case that you have mentioned, it could be very innovative, and of course I have to know the case.
Right.
But at the same time, how do they ensure that this innovation address the complexity of trade agreement and promote sustainability pillars at the same time?
I'll be candid and say not every government official thinks about sustainability first and foremost. They operate within their administrative silos. I doubt if it was an entire sort of phalanx of government officials who were thinking, let's build a port and let's make it sustainable. But to me, it's really important that the trade rules are thought of as an opportunity for innovation towards sustainable development, not just for a very narrow sense of development. Because there are many choices that a government can make on what sectors to open, what sectors to provide that kind of safeguard to, what sectors to provide permissible subsidies to, how will rules, tariff and non-tariff barriers, tax regimes, how will they be incentivized under trading commitments? And one space where I think this is really important and crucial, it's something that Professor Gehring, Professor Seger are very known for. It's also in the area of public health and environmental protection. So even in the intellectual property regime, where we struggle with this on how do we treat traditional knowledge vis-a-vis, pharmaceutical companies will go into indigenous communities, harvest a lot of indigenous knowledge and monetize it. And yet there's no official sort of system that contemplates how you address the sources of extraction that generated this kind of whole industry. They just call it R&D, but really somebody else was doing it for millennia. So to the extent that trade, once one factors in that you can integrate international environmental law, international human rights law, and look at economic law not as a silo, but rather as an integrated regime, then governments get to think about, okay, am I giving these particular safeguards or these particular incentives to the pharmaceutical companies, but am I appropriately protecting not just the proprietary rights of indigenous peoples, but preserving their cultural rights? Because part of the extraction is also, you could lose the right to cultural participation in one's way of life from the wholesale mass production of a specific practice or a specific traditional good, right? Or traditional knowledge. That's one, but there's also, there's, especially now where we're at the frontier of so much of commerce now is electronic. This is also a space where all the hazards come in, because the cyberspace being relatively still unregulated, there's no global treaty. For the most part, when sales of goods or services are taking place online, we're relying on individual states to police. Thankfully, the European Union is so robust and active about policing, or at least providing that kind of anti-competitive, antitrust sort of approach to data privacy and all of these related issues online. The trade regime's openness could be one gateway to ensure the safety of how we how we engage in economic transactions online. It's not been fully utilized yet, but that's a huge area for sustainable development. So I'm heartened because the latest chapter of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership really emphasized sustainable development as an integrated chapter along with electronic commerce. It's probably one of the first few model chapters that I've seen that's done it, but it was based out of the consciousness that, whoa, okay, today we're not just conventionally shipping goods and services. So much of this stuff takes place in the digital sphere. And if trade is not at the forefront of sustainable development and making sure that what we do online is based on sustainable development, then we're going to have another huge regulatory problem. But that's why I think, the work of this program is really important.